Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome, everyone. Is everyone wonderful? Excellent. Are you sure? All right. So I want to welcome you all to our case study on third-party risk management. This case study will be done by Kai Taylor, our third-party management administrator for AgFirst Farm Credit Bank. Now, Kai has nearly a decade of experience in this arena, having previously worked as a business analyst for American Express, overseeing compliance, finance, analysis, vendor management, and contract management for all European, Middle Eastern, and African territories. She also served as a lead contract support for Norland Managed Services, now CBRE, overseeing the vendor management program for the London portfolio. Ms. Taylor holds a business analyst diploma and is also a business and administration level 3 certification. As a graduate of the United Kingdom's Institute of Leadership and Management Institution, she is certified through the Compliance Education Institute as a certified regulatory vendor program manager level 3 advanced. So Kai has been sharing her third-party management stories with much of you, and I've heard a lot of wonderful stories, and now we're glad to have her come up here and share a little more detail of her experiences.
Thank you. So good morning, everybody. So as Matt alluded to, I want to share with you our journey on this road to implementing the third-party management application into our organization. But first, let me just introduce what I want to go through with you today. So this is the vision as to what I want to cover with you, to really give you a flavor of the journey, our pitfalls, our learnings, and hopefully that will help you on your journeys if you haven't already embarked on them. And we're also going to share a bit about where we're going, because obviously this is a journey and it's a continuous improvement that we're going to go on. So I wanted to share what we're doing with you. So a bit about us. Who is AgFirst? So we are an agricultural association or bank. We're federated, and we provide our affiliated associations with funding, which means that they own us. And then they, therefore, provide funding to borrowers who are our farmers, maybe they're our rural homeowners, and therefore they own the associations. So the reason I'm explaining this is because our contract model, our organization model, is very complex. Because our third parties, they don't just service us, they service our associations. And in some cases, they actually service our borrowers. So if you can think about how complex the level of contracting goes down, you can imagine that when we embarked on this journey, it was very complex as we started to map out what we actually wanted to deliver. So just a little bit more about AgFirst, as I alluded to. So just to give you a flavor of some of the services that we provide to our associations. So we cover the eastern border of the United States and Puerto Rico. We have 19 associations, and we provide them with all of these services. So everything that you see here, we, in most cases, will have a third party who is helping us deliver this to our customers, because our associations are our customers. So when you think about what we do as an organization, we are a bank, but we also provide a service. So it's crucial that our partners, which is what I call our third parties, our partners reflect the vision that we want to share with our customers. So just to give a little flavor as to where I started, I joined the organization and did a real big analysis as to what the needs were. So this was a board-level initiative that we got provided by our board. As you know, the industry right now in third-party management, you're seeing more and more of regulators really narrowing down on what we need to do for third-party management. I feel like every day I see something new. We see a new requirement, new conversations, which is all good because it's all helping us to mitigate our risks. But the boards really are, you're starting to see more and more boards pushing down to say, what do we need to do? Because ultimately they're responsible. So they asked us to really deliver a program that helps us deliver a board objective of mitigating our risk for the organization. We wanted a consolidated third-party management program. I'm sure you guys have all got the same predicament where you have an AP system, maybe have a separate BCP management system, then you've got a separate risk system. But from third-party management, we want one tool that collates all of that into one place. If I am looking at vendor, I want to see within my profile everything to do with that vendor. So it's really crucial for our users that can go to one place and they can have access to all of the information that they could possibly need. So the overall bird's eye view, that's all to do with our senior management. They want to see the overview. They don't want the detail. They want to go in, see what they need to see, and get out. So it's not just about delivering the, from what I call the bottom-up delivery. We also need to think about the top-down and actually have an overview for all of our stakeholders across the organization. We needed to standardize our processes, make some efficiencies by automating our processes, and where we can actually start consolidating our contracts, because again, these are the benefits that third-party management bring. You can start stratifying your contracts and rationalizing your third-party database so that you can actually receive cost savings. You can actually start using that information to start negotiating better, looking at the performance. You can now really drive some cost savings by really good metrics. And one of the other things that obviously I'm sure we've heard a lot about over the last couple of days is reporting. So that was really crucial for us as well. But we had challenges. So where we were in our program before I came into the organization, there was fragmentation across the several different business units. They were working in silos, which is not unknown for those who are working in this realm. And what we needed to do was make sure that we got rid of the fragmentation and we started to work together as one entity. We got the increase in third-party technology, which again, coming from the finance industry, this is something that we're seeing more and more. And this means that, again, the complexity of our relationships, it's growing. The data that we needed in order for us to step into this realm was not readily available. So that meant that we had to go out and we had to sit with all of the business users to gather that information. And that, again, is not an easy task. We had to close the gaps where there were processes that were missing. And then again, as I gave an example, we have very complex contractual agreements. So just looking at the challenges versus the needs, you can see from the start, it wasn't a smooth sailing journey. So AgFirst, we are regulated by the Farm Credit Administration. We have a system across the whole of the United States, although we only work on the eastern border. And we call that the Farm Credit System, not to confuse anybody. I'm not going to go into detail about that. But Farm Credit Administration has got a very narrow guideline around third-party management. Again, our history is in services and technology, so that is where they centered on. So when you think about the wider third-party management, we then turned to the other regulations in order to get a guideline as to where we needed to start. And that was just because we needed to think about the wider organization and mitigate the risk for not only our users, our stakeholders, and our customers, as in the associations. So it was crucial for us to look at what was out there and really look at where do we want to start, what do we want to deliver. So we looked at everything that had anything to do with third-party management and took that into account. So this is an interesting one. So why? And I love having this conversation with certain stakeholders, especially my information security officer. Cyber is really big right now. But for us, it's governed by FCA. The assumption is that we are not all of these things are not applicable to us. And it's a really great conversation piece when I have to explain, Yes, we are. We're still foul to any of these regulations because although we're governed by FCA, our vendors may not be. So the service that they are providing us means that we are open to all of these things. And it's a really interesting concept because people don't really think about that. They think about, this is my regulator, this is all I have to do as a bare minimum. And what I'm trying to, again, educate my team and my organization on is that the bare minimum is not going to mitigate the risk that we are open to. So this is something that I have introduced, and there are other things that you can also have, that you can get your CAMEL ratings lowered. There's also a big piece right now around needing to know the regulations for the states that you operate in, not just the ones that you are located in. So there's a whole piece around that as well, which is very complex, especially when you start talking about not just cross-state, but you're talking about cross-border. So you're talking about the EU, GDPR, and all of that realm as well. So it does get very, very complex. But for us, we started to look at what are we mitigating against? And this was a great tool for us to really start looking at what are we open to. It's not moving. There we go. So again, so what did we want to do? So we started looking at what was the governance model that we needed to develop as phase one. So again, we didn't want to going with best practice, taking off the SIG questionnaires, and jumping in and basically hitting all of our end users with those. What we wanted to do is really look at a realistic stance of taking phase one. What are the basic elements that we want to implement? So we targeted onboarding and standardizing that process, standardizing the monitoring of those vendors, looking at the performance scorecards, again, generating standard questions across the business for those sectors, because that, again, it was inconsistent. So we now need to be judging everybody to the same statistics. Looking at issues management, I know we've been talking about that, but around third parties, it's crucial for us to be looking at where we need to be doing actions, where we need to be following up on performance issues, because actually we can actually avoid disruptions to services. So this is something that we're pushing right now because this is big for us. If we can stop a failure from happening, let's do that. If it could be the smallest, but it's still going to be worth it in the end. And then the other thing that we are really excited about is the risk intelligence. So it's actually making it more efficient for us to do our ongoing monitoring. So I have various different platforms that I use in order for me to stay abreast of my third-party management knowledge. Obviously, we use the MSIGs within MetricStream. I'm actually part of some of the specialist third-party management groups. The Certified Vendor Compliance Management is actually one of those, which are a really good tool because, again, it's global, so they give us we can really have some great conversation pieces. White papers are great as well. Again, looking at those people who are doing the studies, giving us the metrics so that we can improve continuously. And I also join webinars quite a lot as well. So challenges, and again, just wanted to expand a little bit on the challenges from our program. So volume. So we're not just talking about vendors, we're talking about relationships. That's where we do the assessment. So we're doing it at the relationship level, which when you have maybe 1,500 vendors, you may have 20,000 relationships. So when you start looking at volume, you then have to think about how quickly can I actually develop this program. The expertise that was available. I am the only person in my third-party management team in the organization, so I actually reach upon my other counterparts in compliance, legal, information security to help me build out their specialist areas. So although I do not have specialist people in my team, I make the rest of my stakeholders my team. And then the culture thing is always a big thing. So for us in AgFirst, we have very big tenured people. So most of our organization, up to maybe 5 to 6 years ago, had been there for 15 to 35 years. So when you're thinking about adopting a new program and trying to implement change, it was a big challenge. So when we started to think about how we can get the buy-in, it was crucial. So that was a major challenge for us outside of standardizing processes, trying to extract tacit knowledge, which is just sometimes impossible. So you have to really get creative in trying to just extract the little pieces of information to just make the program so much better. But it's always going to help us make our program better. The system itself, again, I explained a little bit about the multiple systems we had. So it was trying to, again, take the information out of the systems and put it into a template that we could actually embark on this journey for M7. Because, again, we had multiple systems, and the information in those systems were inconsistent. So, again, we had to harmonize those in order for us to take that step into the journey. So this is the model that I use for my solution. And across the top, you'll see the areas that I had mentioned earlier about the different pieces of the program that I wanted to introduce. And down here are the dimensions of risk. And I don't know if anybody has done anything about the dimensions of risk. It's my favorite area right now. But the main thing that I drive across my organization is that this is not a one-time effort. And any time during the whole life cycle of third-party management, you can have a particular item against one of those risks occur. And therefore, we have to address it. We have to completely do a new assessment, review how that is impacting the relationship, and again, making sure that if we have a risk from the risk intelligence that then makes the risk rating high, we then go back to the due diligence. We relaunch and say, what is the new risk and the new control measures that we need to do with this relationship? So it's really crucial for us to understand that this is a constant process. The good thing about a lot of these dimensions of risk is the risk intelligence within the metric stream system covers a lot of this. When you subscribe, you get automated alerts, and you can actually just review the changes that are happening with your vendor rather than having to extract that. So it really is a big help. We subscribe and get that on a weekly basis. So every Monday morning, I'm going in and looking at what my new notifications are. But it's a really great conversation piece at the beginning of the week to say, what do we need to do? Is there anything that we need to do and look at? And I get my stakeholders together and start doing that review. So again, the solution, we're looking for integrated, consistent, efficient, and risk-averse all the time whenever we're doing anything within third-party management. And at the bottom is a little diagram, and I don't know if you can see that clearly from where you are, but it's the OCC life cycle. And I put it here to really demonstrate that what I'm doing with my program delivers the OCC life cycle, although it is in a different way. And I'll explain why that's there in this next slide, which is just that there is no one-size-fits-all. So we created our program to match our organization. And I think that's important because there are various guidelines and best practices out there, and you really have to do the assessment to say, does this work for me? If it doesn't, then you need to adapt it so that it does work for you. And I think that's really crucial for third-party management because every vendor's different, every relationship's different. And we are having a conversation just now about the risk assessment and then saying, okay, I'm going to do a risk assessment and it's critical, but then my second relationship is not critical. So I can't have the same rating applying to the various relationships. I have to look at this at the relationship level and look at the risks associated with that relationship. So we had to build a model that allowed us to do that. Metrics is a big one for us. Where we started, the metrics were driving the wrong outcome. The vendors were doing the bare minimum just to deliver a score. Now we have basically re-engineered the whole scorecarding process. They are having to they're having to perform to the contracts which they have signed and agreed to. So now I'm re-educating our people to say, okay, what is it they're supposed to be providing us? And now we're judging them to what we're supposed to be receiving rather than just the bare minimum of what they're delivering. So metrics is really important to make sure that you're getting the right outcome because you could actually get the opposite of what you're trying to get. And again, the key thing for us is communication. I'm always up and down around my building. I was having a conversation yesterday about the fact I think I spend more time walking around my building than sitting at my desk. And if I do come to my desk, I've usually got someone sitting there waiting for me because they know where I sit now, which is great. But the main thing is that the communicating is really starting to generate some really good energy in the organization. And now I'm not having to extract information out of my team. They're really coming to me now and going, hey, I saw this, what do I need to do? And it's a great conversation piece because before, if they didn't know, they just would ignore it because what they don't know, they just put it on the back burner and don't think about it. Now they really come into the table and going, okay, I have this risk, I don't know what to do about it, what do you recommend? And then we sit down and work through that and we record it within Metric Stream. So again, we have that audit trail. So I know they've gone through a lot, and it sounds like we were really geared up, and it was great, but we were not. So, like I said, I was hired, so they had to hire me to develop this program. We had to assess and put new procedures, policies, and directives in place. There was not a third-party directive in place in the organization. And then the biggest piece was stratifying the portfolio. We started with 10,000 vendors. I managed to get that down to 2,600, and then just before we went live, we got that down to 911. And that was doing things like looking at expired contracts, looking at duplications and consolidating, looking at where we had the same vendor for multiple addresses, and actually we could just add this into our MSA agreement and actually have a child rather than having a new agreement and having another vendor. So there was a really big stratification of the vendor portfolio that we had to do in order for us to take a step in. Because if I gave a system to my users with 10,000 vendors to manage, it wasn't going to be successful. So we spent maybe 4 months going through and harmonizing all of that before we even started to do any of the requirements. So when you start thinking about readiness and what you need to do in order to deliver your program, I put my hands up and was like, we're not ready. We just need to park this for a second and get ready to do this, because if we started building out the program at that time, we would have built out something that wasn't adequate for what we were trying to achieve as an end goal. And again, just a little bit more about the processes, and I know we covered this a minute ago, but again, established system users, which was big. We needed to create approval authorities. We needed to create the escalation levels. We needed to create user groups. So again, not everybody has access to the system. The only people who have access are those who have authority in our organization to either sign an invoice, therefore they can own a relationship. We have only a few individuals who can actually sign contracts. And then we have some SMEs. So we have small groups that are easily maintainable that we can actually have working sessions with and, again, collaborate and continue to drive the system forward. So this is, I'm going to go through and give you a little flavor of our journey. So in 2018, we implemented the out-of-the-box third-party management system. And as I said, we just take the first step into this realm. We didn't want to go too far. We just wanted to take a quick step into making sure the users adopted and bought into what we were trying to do. This year, we're actually implementing the contract management workflow. That was a big gap for us. We found and discovered that people were, although they are supposed to be going through procurement for their contracts, they were not doing that. So we're creating a process that the only channel that you can actually start a new contract, SOW, PO, renewal, or maybe we need to do a termination, you have to go into the system and start the process within the application. And this is big for us because we need to make sure that we can get everybody using the same consistent process. So this is something that we are excited for because right now it's completely disjointed and I have paper come on my desk all the time. I'm like, where have these vendors come from? And we're just, again, trying to tidy that up and get some consistency. We're also implementing Tableau. We're connecting that to the metric stream system so that we can do some really good analytic reporting. We did weigh up whether we needed to do that inside of M7 or do that outside of M7, and we discovered that we're talking about audit requirements. The audit could turn up tomorrow, the regulator could turn up tomorrow and ask us for a piece of information. We do not have weeks in order for us to create these reports. So actually, Tableau gives us the ability to quickly drill down and provide them the information they need with a one-time effort rather than us having to consistently be trying to recreate reports. In 2020, we are going to be implementing BitSight, the cybersecurity assessment tool, and that is going to integrate within TPM. And we're actually doing a lot more about risk ratings and heat matrices for the dimensions of risk that is actually going to associate with that BitSight score. We're actually aiming to implement the metric stream mobile app. This, again, is all about user adoption. Now, they don't have to be at their desk in order to do these reviews. They don't have to be at their desk in order to create a new relationship. They can do it wherever they are. Maybe we have somebody who's approving a questionnaire. They can do that wherever they are. So again, it's all about making the user experience better. The other thing that we're doing is within the audit module, there is a great there's a great section about vendor audits. Now, that is another piece of our program that we're going to be building out. Instead of us having to create a custom, which is, you do not want to do anything custom, instead of trying to create a customized feature within TPM, we're actually going to utilize what's already available in the audit management tool. This means that we can now, again, standardize the site audits, we can do some metrics and reporting, and more importantly for us is that we can actually start trending, because what we want to do is actually start linking all of these things back to the vendor. So now, if they're doing site audits, they're discovering things when they're on site that then leads to a failure, we can now link that into issues management and start using some automation to start generating the kind of tasks that we should be doing when we find certain actions. So we're always looking forward, and we're always thinking about how we can make the user experience better. And then in 2021, we're starting to look at other elements of vendor management, and they're just things like financial viability assessments is a good example. We have to do those of our vendors, and we're currently using an external tool. Now, if we can figure out a way that we can actually not only either do it within the tool or pull the information into the tool and actually make the user experience much better, this, again, is giving us a benefit. So again, if instead of my users having to manually go in and upload or attach, now we want to actually, maybe we're going to upload this as a template, and I'm going to generate these results, and it's going to actually pull into the risk assessment. So I'm thinking, we're looking long-term about building out our program, and we're trying to make sure that from a strategic or an end-user experience, this is going to make it more efficient for us to identify our risks. So we rolled out, like I said, in a very organized way. We had a dedicated team of 5 people who helped develop, test, write, and collate a lot of the information. We did very detailed requirements mapping, and that was important because, like I said, we have various associations. Now, whilst our associations are not using this tool right now, we have built it out that if they do choose to use it in the future, they could easily do that. And again, we had regular meetings, we did deep dive UAT, which was crucial for us, and making sure that the system was ready to be shown to our end users. So instead of just doing simple UAT testing, we actually did every single step in our use cases, which was important for us to make sure that everything worked that it was the way it was supposed to, the scores were generating the way that they were supposed to, and we even found things in the system that we didn't want our users to do. So a good example was in the questionnaires. If you create an issue within the questionnaire, you can't then close the questionnaire to complete the risk assessment. We didn't want our users to do that because that meant that we couldn't get a risk rating. So again, we developed all of our training material And I do have some with me so that if anybody wanted to have a look at any of those, you can. But we developed all of our processes, again, to ensure that the end user experience was as seamless as possible. So the system has capabilities that we did not share with our end users. And it wasn't because we wanted to limit what they were doing. We want to make their experience better. So I think there were just things that we just, again, harmonized and made sure that the message that we presented to them was as consistent as possible. Another thing that was crucial for us was how we actually sold it to our end users. So we did, again, subject matter area training. We did the executives first, which was a lot of fun. And then we started working our way down. And what we did was create training material, quick reference guides. We actually did infographics, so all of my executives have a little card which tells them the 3 steps that they need to do in the system. But it was just thinking about who is my audience, how much time do they have, and what is their type of learning. So we did face-to-face learning in a group, and we actually have, we're kind of like we have a room with computers in it, so actually we were doing training together on the live system in UAT, not on the live, but on the system. And then we actually did one-on-one sessions with each of them so that if anybody had any questions or anything that they didn't want to say in front of the group, they had a chance to really open up with just me in the room. And they did. They didn't hold back, which was great. And then we also have the training guides, and we're actually about to create in our career cafe system, a third-party management training module. So all of the training elements of my user guide will be in there, quick 2 to 3 minutes videos that walks them through the steps, and they can just quickly go in, just select the one that they want, and it's just like I'm there with them. So again, we're just thinking about all the elements of learning that they possibly could be open to, and just the main thing is just being available, as I said. They come to me all the time and ask me how to do things, but I think the main thing was just making it seamless and easy. So that is not where it ended. The life after the implementation, we consistently communicate with them. We have dedicated monthly newsletters where we talk about different elements of third-party management that goes out every month. We have working groups with our stakeholders. We have lunch and learn sessions with all of our users where they can ask questions. I usually ask, we've got one that's coming up in a couple of weeks, and I ask them to tell me, suggest to me what you would like to talk about. So rather than me telling them more information and more information and more information, let me help answer the questions that you have. And really, it's just to eradicate that line between me and them. Although I am the second line, I really want to get into their minds and understand what it is they want, because I think that's crucial into managing the balance between our strategic objective and our users who are actually doing the delivery. So it's really important for us to have that continuous improvement, continuous communication, and continue to develop in the right ways, taking both into account. So our system is supporting 90 users today. And again, this is a very small group that we carved out of our organization to, again, drive that standardization. We have very clear assessment processes in the system today. Part of our phase 2 is actually to enhance those, and we actually have a schedule to enhance them again next year. We're actually embarking on putting the SOC 2 certifications in the system this year too. So we're always looking at what we can do to not only centralize, make it more efficient, and actually just make it easier for our end users to do what they have to do from a due diligence and monitoring point of view. Another part of what we're doing around third-party management is fourth parties. We have some very core systems where we have some really critical fourth parties, and I'm working with my users to actually help them, again, centralize the audit information, but look at what their third parties have in place. So it's, again, we're always looking at how we can benefit them, and it could be something that's really small to me, which is massive to them. So we're always looking at making it quicker, strengthening our controls over third-party management, and actually just continuously trying to improve, because as we know, the industry is growing and we need to make sure that the program keeps up speed with how that is growing, and that adoption of those changes are very crucial. So again, this is just a little small overview to show the before and after. So again, we had a very fragmented risk model over the organization. We're very siloed. Again, risk rating was a big one. My criticality in IT was completely different to my criticality in lending. And then that was completely different to my criticality in information security. So again, harmonizing and actually saying what is critical. And I actually did a really great example in my SMC meeting, which everybody laughed with me for, which is great. But it was actually to say, I took our key vendors and said to them, is this a critical vendor? And they were like, no. And I said, okay. So an example is our bank. If our bank went bust tomorrow, how would we pay our bills? How would we pay our employees? And suddenly it dawned on them, they're critical, but they weren't on the critical list. So that was a really big exercise, just trying to use real-life examples to get them to think about what is critical, and separating the criticality to the risk rating, which is, again, really important. So again, afterwards, we're going to get some consistency across our portfolio, and I think the main thing is that no matter where I go in my organization, I'm going to know that they're doing the right process, they're using the same terms, we're looking at the same things, and we have the same end goal no matter what department you're going to. So for us, it has been a journey, it isn't over, and so long as you have the support and the buy-in, you're going to have a challenge, but the challenge is going to be manageable. And I think that was the key for me, which is we didn't give up, we kept fighting through, and the delivery has just benefited us tenfold. So I think that was it, I think. Yes. So I would open it up to any questions, if anyone has any questions for me.
1,000, but I mean, I can't think of, I don't know where to start because there's so many.
Were you integrating this with any existing contract lifecycle management platform, or this was it? Okay.
We had absolutely no vendor management system process in the organization. Now, we had risk management going on in the organization, but it wasn't third-party management. So even if you looked at scorecarding, what they were doing was doing the top 5 vendors, and the top 5 vendors what they were looking at wasn't even performers. It was just simply, what did we spend? How did they rate on the RFP? Were they 10% below average? So what they were looking at wasn't real risk management. So again, we didn't just buy the solution, it was actually creating the program so that we could actually use the solution. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Good, thank you. Anybody else?
Thanks so much, Kai. It was absolutely a wonderful presentation. I think maybe there was almost an advantage in the fact that you didn't have a program, because that allowed you to come in and really build something. Do you have any advice for those of us who have sort of ad hoc programs here and there that we're trying to corral into a unified program?
So in my organization now, we didn't have a program. In my previous organization, we did. And the platform that we were using, it was an out-of-the-box system, but it did everything. And where you didn't have the processes, you fundamentally couldn't use like a whole section of the system until you did. So what we had to do was actually look at, I had to say pause. That was the first thing. I had to say pause of our management and say, okay, we're trying to run a marathon and get to the finish line so that we can actually use a particular part of the system. And I said to him, instead of us doing that, let's look at the basics for each of these sections so that we could at least just use the basic elements of each one, and then we have a plan in how we're going to continuously build out these sections. Maybe we're going to do a 6-month rolling plan, and we're going to launch more and more into the program every 6 months. The 6 months actually became a year, but what we actually achieved in the year was just phenomenal, because we had to actually go to each of our countries, because this was when I was working across EMEA, so I had 7 different countries and 15 different buildings, but we had to go out and actually look at what each of those countries were doing, looking at the regulations for each of those countries, and looking at where we could harmonize across the portfolio to make it consistent, which was really tricky at first, because as you know, in different countries, everyone has their own mindset. They want to do the minimum. They don't want to do the maximum. And where you have one country that requires more, it's very difficult to convince them to do more. So we really said, okay, what is the minimum point across the whole of these countries? And I think about that in AgFirst for our departments. What's the minimum I can do across all of my departments? And that's my starting point. And I think that really helped to unburden the organization of trying to actually do everything and be compliant. I think there is that real confusion over being compliant and getting to compliant. And I think so long as you can show your journey and you can explain how you're getting there and what you're doing to get there and what you need funding-wise to get there, from what I have experienced with our regulators, they are open to that. So long as you know what your journey is and you can explain it and demonstrate it, I've not ever had any pushback on us not fully achieving compliance yet.
Any other? There you go.
That's a great journey, and I think especially I'm very excited on the change management, the way it was handled. So my question, actually I have 2 questions on the change management. So the first one was, how much of it is the tool really actually drive the change management, and how much of it is in terms of the internal processes and the change that you have to drive on your side? And the second one is, what are the strategies that you have followed to pull in executives to use the tool? I think you called out some small cards, but if you could elaborate on that.
So the funny thing, so I give you insider information as to how I got my buy-in, which was great. It was a really fun exercise I did. I actually made them watch. There is a video, and I don't know if anyone's ever seen this. There's a video, and you can Google it on YouTube. It's a attention video, and basically what it does, it says, please count how many times. There's 2 teams, 2 basketball teams, and it says, please count how many times the team in white passed the ball to each other. So I did this to everybody in my organization, and they were all sitting there watching this video, and they were like, okay, it's 13. And I said, you're right. And I said, and then the screen changes, and it says, did you see the dancing bear? And nobody in the room saw the dancing bear, because they were all concentrating on these 2 teams passing the ball. And they were like, no, there was no dancing bear. And then the video replays, and it's like, oh, I didn't see that. And it was that we had gone through, in one of the sessions, we had a 2-hour session talking about change, talking about where we needed to go to, the culture change and everything else. And the moment it dawned on them that, you know what, I'm not doing it, was the video. And it was crazy for me that I even had my change management manager in the room, and she herself was like, I didn't see it. And it was that moment of I like to use examples outside of my what I call my circle, to kind of get them to understand what I see as the journey. And it was that moment for me that they suddenly was like, I need to do this. And suddenly the room atmosphere changed. It was that moment in time, the room just instantly changed, and everybody all of a sudden was like, how do we do this? How do we now get on this journey? So for me, it wasn't even about just looking at the culture change and looking at what we need to do from process sort of thing. It was actually the mindset, because I think you can put whatever processes you want in place. Unless people are on board for your journey, you're going to have that battle. So that was just how I managed to kind of get over that hurdle and get them to come over to my thinking of, you know, taking this journey. It's an amazing video, and if anyone ever wants to go online and have a look at it, it's a really great tool to kind of just check and see, are we doing it? And I had a few other examples, but from a group point of view, we really had to, and again, not to go across to some of the other things we're doing, because we're doing a bit about the enterprise and operational side of things as well, but again, there was a gap. So we had to really look at not just what do I need a third-party management. Third-party management touches so many different elements of the organization. So whatever mapping that we had to create from an organizational chart for our application, it had to work for all of those other pieces. So as we implement the enterprise module, or when we do the disaster recovery or the operational, that mapping still has to work. So we really had to look at what was it that we were trying to achieve, who needed to be in those groups, and fundamentally saying no, which is the big one, because once people knew what it was that we were doing, everybody wanted access. And we had to say, you're not getting access because, and given them that reason. So we actually have now a approval authority list, which we didn't have before, but that really is a list of each of the cost centers and who has approval authority and what for. And that feeds through now not just for my system, we use it for our finance system, we use it now for our contractual compliance. So again, harmonizing that was key, and so long as you have those groups and it works across the organization, the change is easier. Is that okay?
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't, you're like right in the light, I can't see you.
Kai, this is Kai back here at Susan. You know, one of the points that was raised earlier in the front about how do you get everybody moving in the right direction. I know that when we worked with you, there was this concept of establishing, you know, what does basic look like? What does rationalized look like? What does optimized look like? And in each of those categories, there were defined attributes for basic, rationalized, and optimized. And then that really created a bit of the journey, right, for you to determine where you're going to go. Can you just talk about how you thought that through?
And just to your point, I think the other thing that we also did was we also looked at the maturity model and said, what things do we not want to be rationalized on? Because I think you can also go too far. So we were looking, for instance, we looked at our policies and said, do we want to rationalize those? No, we didn't. We just wanted to simply get them into a centralized repository so that we could monitor those, give access, and start doing some attestations. But again, for our journey in TPM, we took each element and not only looked at where we are, which is important, where are you now? And doing a real honest view as to where you are now, and looking at where do I want to be? And not where do you want to be at the end goal, where do I want to be at the end of my project, which is what we did our assessment on. And I think that's crucial, because you can end up trying to aim for rationalize and failing. Because if you do not have the processes in place, the likelihood is you're not going to go from basic to optimize, I'm sorry. You may be able to achieve rationalize, but you're not going to get to optimize. So we really had to take a realistic view and say, we do not have that, and the likelihood we're going to go from having nothing to really getting an optimized system is unrealistic. So we really took each of those elements and assessed each critical component and said, okay, this is where we are, we can achieve optimize. This is where we are, we're only going to do basic. And taking each of those elements, and I think I still have that, and I can share that with anybody I can send that to anybody after the session. But it was really a great tool to actually establish what do we want to do, what do we want to deliver. And I think especially for my management, it was a good tool to, again, get them to really concentrate on what can we actually do, because the end goal can be as far away as it wants to be, but you have to think about what you can realistically do today.
Kai, thank you so much. This is breaking my heart, but we are
I know.
over time. So, wonderful session, amazing job. I'm honored to work with you. Kai's here for the rest of the day, so if you want to follow up with any other questions, thank you, Kai.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Well, you know, it'll be great.
Impromptu.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I've explained it to you, so I'll put. Since you guys are gonna be sitting, I'll put the clicker on the table.
Maybe we'll probably just sort of hand over.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. No. Okay. Okay. Wait. Say that again. Oh no, it shouldn't have been connected. They're testing. That's why. Sorry. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We're going to be starting here in about 1 minute on our session, so I'd like my colleagues to come onto the stage, please. Susan. Now, one more. There's I have one too. Okay. So, good morning, everybody. I'm Anna Mazzoni, and I am the Managing Director for Metric Stream's business in the UK, Ireland, Northern Europe. So I'm very happy to be here. I just want to let you know that one of our colleagues, Brenda Boltwood, was on the schedule to do this session, and unfortunately, she couldn't make it. So it took 4 of us to replace her. So I'm going to ask each of my colleagues to introduce themselves. Essentially, what you're going to have is got 3 practitioners here, and then I have experience in terms of running KYC utility, a business unit. So you've got very diverse views. I'll kick it off with the introductions. So started life as a banker at Bank of America, and I've been in what I call the reg tech space for the past 10 years, mainly working in the UK and Europe. Go ahead.
I'm Victoria Muñoz-Titos. I work with Anna in London, and I have been working in insurance for the last 20 years throughout different parts of the insurance life cycle. And I was just relating to Kate in the earlier presentation about third-party management, as that's been one of my key areas for the last 10 years as well, working across EMEA. So I'm very happy to be here and trying to explain and share experiences, which I'm sure you will no doubt relate to. Thank you.
Hi, Peter Bannister. I am, I think as many of you know by now, in week 4 of my Metric Stream career. So prior to this, I led the Fannie Mae GRC program for 4 years. And we started off back in 2015 with vendor selection, and then we built out governance, data, and other technologies to enhance that program and get that up and running. Very happy to be here. And
hi, everyone. Susan Palm from the Customer Success Group in the Americas. And prior to joining Metric Stream, I had responsibility for audit compliance, operational risk, fraud and credit review for a small bank that was under a cease and desist order. Prior to that, I actually worked for one of the world's largest banks and was responsible for operational risk, business continuity, building out the third-party risk management program, as well as data security. So I look forward to the conversation today.
Thank you. So before we jump in, I'd like to find out, operational resilience is a bit of a new topic, new relative like in the past couple of years. We'd like to see a show of hands. How many of your organizations actually talk about operational resilience? Okay, so it's about 50% of the audience. Great. So in terms of what we're going to cover today, what we're going to talk about is why is operational resilience important? but also start to provide you a framework in terms of how to manage operational resilience. And we're going to look at how do you identify business services, because you don't want to take the siloed approach anymore, right, in terms of understanding resilience. How are you going to set impact tolerance? How are you going to understand what the dependencies are, particularly around third parties, internal and external? How are you going to do scenario planning? And then looking at action plans and communication plans and kind of testing in this space. So as I was preparing for this meeting, I was looking up a couple of definitions for how different organizations kind of describe operational resilience. And Gartner says, it's a set of techniques that allow people, processes, and information systems to adapt to changing patterns. It's that ability to alter your operation in the face of changing business conditions. And then I've got another one that's rapidly adapt and responds to internal and external dynamic changes, and that's even opportunities that present themselves to you in your market. I think the Bank of England, the PRA, and the FCA about 2018 was the first regulator globally to come out and demand that all of the entities that are managed and regulated by them have to put operational resilience programs in place by next year. They're now working, obviously, with the US regulators on this topic. But essentially, the reason they came to this is because they said, if there's a financial contagion effect in the markets, we can control that, and we can wind down a bank. But if you have an operational risk problem, and you haven't tested your systems properly, we can't control that. And so that is why they've put these plans in place. So let's kind of look at some of the impacts here and why are these risk events on the rise. So the first thing that we look at here is that we start with cyber incidences. And of course, those tend to be kind of the biggest things that hit the news headlines. Under the new European GDPR regulation, you are required to report within 72 hours data breaches. Many of these firms, international firms, if you were to go to this website that's up here, information is beautiful, you'll see a nice chart of all the data breaches that are getting reported. And they go back to about 2010, the largest being recently with Marriott, 383 million individuals' data was stolen. So the fact that the European reg is requiring these data breaches now to be publicly disclosed is why we're also starting to see more of this information coming out. Then you have broader operational risk problems, such as people, processes, and just organizational cultural changes. The three examples here that we've got are banks, right? But then you could add to that Target, right? The violation they had with an HVAC vendor who stole information by tapping into the network. Then you've got BA last summer, third-party supplier, who disrupted 10,000 individuals' flights on June the 18th, which cost the firm about $10 million in compensation, which you'd say, that's not bad. But the reputational damage has been huge for them. And then, of course, you've got Volkswagen, right? The emissions testing violation has cost the firm, according to the news, $18 billion, right? Then let's move over and we talk about this global and interconnected world. We've seen a lot of conversation about that over the past couple days. And in particular in the financial markets, it's a very much a networked environment. The regulator in Denmark, as a result of the problems with Danske and the money laundering scandal, has now forced the other banks in Denmark to increase their capital allocation. Now, obviously, we understand the impact of that, but when one of your peers in the industry is not following the rules, you can see how it has a financial impact on yourself. But even for corporates, things such as cloud providers now start to become a part of this global interconnected environment. So these are not...
Anna, can I just add something real briefly? So, and I promised I was going to send this around after the conference, but the white paper that we put out, that will come out shortly, ties in very nicely to this, and it's about erosion of shareholder value and how integrated risk management and GRC is there to protect shareholder value. So the numbers on the screen here are the actual fines and dollar losses, but the link in the white papers makes a case that the the shareholder value erosion is multiples of the actual financial losses. And having an operational resilience in place to cap the reputational damage and thus the shareholder value damage is also important. So,
and sometimes that can't be anticipated at the time that this information occurs, because in the situation with Wells Fargo, it's this process of people moving and switching that they have no ability really to estimate, and the damage continues well beyond the time of the event.
And you think about other events, and it may be hard to remember this one because it was handled so well. I think there was an incident with Southwest Airlines where, unfortunately, I think somebody died because something happened with the plane and the window, but the execution of the business resiliency, the disaster, I mean, it wasn't disaster recovery, but it was a disaster. The folks at Southwest mustered so quickly, the leadership team, and they practiced and practiced and practiced. They got hold of that event very quickly, and very quickly it left the pages of the press. And I think that preparedness, obviously, in that space was critical for them. And I don't think they suffered that shareholder loss.
Right. Like Wells does, because it lingers on the headlines.
Yep.
Yeah.
So to the points they're making, this severely impacts organizations, and you can see here in this chart in terms of the market cap impact versus perception. So obviously we see immediate results through stock gain, stock prices, or financial gain, and the shareholder equity impact. But then you obviously have credibility, brand impact, reputational damage. So what we're trying to do is obviously move to a place of mitigating operational disruption through your operational risk management programs, mitigating the risk in the process of doing business, but also trying to prevent the impact, I would say, of operational disruption, because the reality is we're going to be disrupted. And that's where the Bank of England and the PRA are coming from, and the FCA. It's a known fact. You are going to be disrupted. How are you going to be able to manage this? And I think this statement here about operational disruptions and the cause and the harm to consumers, market participants, threat to viability of firms. The one other group of interested parties there, I think, are us, employees of the firms we work for. When there's operational disruption, that potentially we can lose our jobs, and not because of poor performance, right? So we all should be interested to understand how our firms are managing this. So now, Peter, I think you're going to take us through kind of the framework.
Yeah, absolutely. So, is it the green one? And we talked about this a little bit on Monday with Jim Beam from McKinsey, and I think he had a cyber lens, but it's all all very similar. So, as we think about resilience being the ability of the firms to prevent, respond, recover, and learn. Some of the examples that we've already talked about, Southwest as an example, not preventable, but the response, recovery, and the learnings from that were absolutely, excellent. And as such, they did not lose that value and so on. More broadly, though, as we think about context from Monday, and I'll ask this to the audience, target the right things. Who here, or whose company here, has a framework in place such that if I asked you, do you know the top 5 things or the top 5 right things that you would target for a resilience program? Do you have the critical processes mapped out, or the critical assets? Do you have that list? And I'm just going to look for, are you confident that you have that list?
A few people, yeah.
So that's I was expecting more than 3 hands to go up. But I think this is, without this framework, that's a pretty scary, informal poll there. So if you, and I think, I forget who said it, it may have been Jim Quigley, if you put a magnifying glass, over a shaky framework, then that's only going to get worse. So what you might do in step 2, and maybe I'll ask this next question, who is building resilience plans who didn't raise their hand for the first one, if that makes sense? Okay, and so the rest of you who haven't raised your hands, do you have a resilience plan in place, and are you sort of marching towards a target state of building and of identification? Okay, so I think these are the steps and these are the building blocks that we need to go through to build the frameworks, target the right things, and then obviously, like Southwest did, tabletop often, muster often, and practice and practice and practice. Susan, were you going to jump in?
I was just going to say, when you asked the first question about do you have a plan, I think the other question to consider is how many different plans do you have?
Right.
Because, I think if we went to IT and asked them what is their plan for data security, we would get something that might mirror one of the frameworks, be it NIST or one of the PCI frameworks. If we were to go to, the business continuity team and ask them, what does your framework look like for recovery of a physical space or even technology, I think we would get a different set of steps and a plan. And I think the big challenge, compliance, with a control gap in terms of laws or regulations. I think the challenge, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, is not just do you have these frameworks, but how have you connected these frameworks together?
I think as well is the fact that usually those frameworks, which I agree with you, that would exist in different places, they would be likely operational frameworks. They would not be frameworks where the impact and the risk universe that we're trying to manage has been mapped out. And that in itself is a fundamental internal risk. So we're trying to manage with the resilience aspect, we're trying to think about the external impact and disruption, but the reality is that from an internal point of view, we are increasing and aggravating the disruption that it would cause based on how we've organized things or not.
Mm-hmm. And I think I'll probably save this for the wrap-up at the end, but this is, again, to go full circle back to day one. Again, with that informal poll, this feels like a known unknown. So we know, just by judging on the data set and our experience, we know we need to do this. We know this is a risk. So we need to move that down and to the left to get it to be a known, and then we can move forward.
Should we move forward?
Yeah, thanks. So, 6 key steps, and I'll just jump into these a little bit. Oh.
Yeah?
No, sorry, back. There we go.
Okay.
So building the resilience within the ORM framework. So we've talked about number 1, defining key business services, critical economic functions. And I think to Susan's point, there may be 7 or 8 different versions of that depending on who you ask. So I think that alignment, and this is obviously the essence of GRC, and that's why we're all here. Right. But that alignment of the siloed approaches and the siloed views. So, mechanisms and tangible ways to do this, single process view, single process hierarchy, or a capability model, just one for the firm, getting those risk rated or relevance rated, just like Jim was talking about. We talk about relevance, and are these the right things that we should be focused on, and then rank ordering them somehow, whether it is with a risk rating, and then obviously having the budget to go and execute and build these plans. So define those is obviously absolutely critical. Impact and risk metrics. We want to make sure that we are appropriately ranking them, rating them, and making sure that gets all the way to the boardroom to sort of sign off, or at least the management level committee. Understanding, this is key again, to have a single version of the process view. What is the upstream and downstream impacts? So you may identify, make it up, cash management as your number 1 thing you want to be resilient around, but if there are upstream systems that would stop you being, stop you standing it back up, you got to make sure those are connected and those are understood. So you've got sort of the full horizontal and vertical view of your critical capabilities. Scenarios for potential points of failure. I think another thing Jim said, I think it may have been in the CXO session, you do need to make these real. Scenarios can help you do that, but you also have to be realistic. So I think the example he gave was, if you ask somebody who is deep in cyber knowledge, give me a credible worst case scenario, well, that means that we're going to get attacked, they're going to steal all the data, steal all our money, and shut the business down. So possible, yes. Credible, probably not. Realistic, maybe definitely not. And I think as he talked about it, it was, and again from a cyber perspective, who has the appetite and the wherewithal and the capabilities to actually execute on those scenarios? So maybe state actors, yes. Do they have the desire or the appetite to ruin a firm? Again, depending on, maybe not, maybe not. And I think it's that relevance, whether the scenarios are real and realistic. Close to my heart, having led a GRC program, communications plan, stakeholder map, absolute must-haves for everything that we've already talked about. If you don't have adoption and buy-in and sign-off and governance around this thing, you will not be successful. And then number 6, we talk about regulator access, but it's really just full transparency. And I will say at Fannie Mae, it was very well known, what were our top 5, top 10 critical capabilities, how many hours could we withstand an outage for, and so on. And I was interviewed as a part of my role. They asked me, if GRC went down, how long could you survive without it? And again, they went. Some folks were 4 hours, and some folks were sort of 2 weeks. And that helps. But that transparency, not only for the regulator but also for the business owners, is absolutely critical.
Okay. So how we go about identifying the important business service? Yes?
Yeah, so I think there we go. Let's just go, yep, they go all the way. So again, I've touched on this, right? You need to ask the first line. You need to ask the business units. If ERM, internal audit, compliance, IT, they may have a perspective, but really, what is the business's perspective and aligning behind that? You do need your data models, you need your org hierarchy, and it says it here, what does the market want? That's the first line will have that answer for you. So very important to align and get that first line perspective. Now, measure feels like a bit of an analog to the risk appetite here. So what is the risk appetite of the firm? Usually you have these components, so financial risk appetite, customer market impact, financial stability and viability. So all of these things typically will be part of your risk appetite. So that may be a place to start in terms of deciding where which ones are more important than others. And then contrast and compare across the firm. So not everybody's equal, not all processes are equal, and then you also have to have somebody make a call at the top of the house to define this.
Do you want me to build this out?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a nice way to use our data model, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a lot on this slide, but I think that the key takeaway is, like we've said, you need organization, business services, business objectives, market expectations, and then obviously the regulatory expectations. But it's all about, I think it's all the same thing. It's all about the same theme, which is what can we withstand, and does that align to my risk appetite?
Mm-hmm. If I could just add one comment here, going back to that siloed conversation we had a moment ago where information security has their framework and others have their framework, the key now is to take it to what really matters, which is the alignment with the business. And that's where it's incredibly important to start talking to these business lines to understand what are their strategic objectives for this year, because then you can kind of peel back the onion to understand if your strategic objective is this, what are all of the dependent systems, the dependent processes, the dependent people, and the dependent third parties that are going to be pulled together in order to meet that objective. And that's where this integration of GRC and business objectives really starts to gel. And it's the place where for many companies it's the next step, but it would be interesting to see in the audience how many of you are now taking your GRC data and really mapping it back to business objectives so that if you have a control failure, you immediately understand what that means to a business. I do think that's not surprising to see that there aren't a lot of hands up, because I think we're all still, working to get the basic constructs in place. But this is really kind of the optimized view of where GRC needs to land.
No, absolutely. I think that's the power of GRC. But I mean, I do have another question. As we talked about risk appetite and strategic objectives, how many firms here's risk framework ties directly to corporate objectives? Obviously we think with the COSO and so a few. So again, I would advent, as you go back and take, obviously take takeaways from the summit. Almost the easiest way to realize the value of this content and context is potentially to map your risks to your strategic objectives, and then you've all got a common currency to and the benefit, I think, one of the key benefits, you can prevent those firefights, and those fire drills. So if something is flashing red, know that it means it's actually red, versus somebody's opinion or bias. You've actually got data. So something breaks, it could be very, very insignificant. And somebody was telling me a story yesterday about JP Morgan, and there was a currency decline in Southeast Asia, and the CEO of JP Morgan was, on his phone and asking, what's our exposure, and there was a big to-do. And then it turns out that the exposure for JP in that particular currency was, I think, a couple of $1 million. That's the amount they traded, compared to the trillions of dollars they trade in US dollars each day. So had, the data been pinned to the strategic objectives, or it had been appropriately rated, risk rated, lots of effort and energy, which I'm sure you can all empathize with, could have been saved. So mapping the risks to strategic objectives would be one of the key steps, I think.
Perfect. Thank you. So now what we're going to talk about, Victoria's going to talk about how do we understand our impact tolerance in the world of ops resilience. So do you want me to build it out for you?
Thank you, Anna. Yes. So I think many of the ideas have already been shared, and I think it's important when thinking about tolerances. I would ask why are we wanting to do that? And like we said, well, we don't live in a risk-free world. We know that there's many unknowns, as we've heard this week, and the reality is that some of these unknowns will turn into actual massive disruptions that will be impacting on the firm and putting the shareholder value that we mentioned earlier, the brand, the customers, it will put it at risk. So trying to forecast or preempt, proactively mitigate and manage these unforeseen disruptions is going to be of paramount importance for the sustainability of the organization. The other aspect is we have not got, organizations don't have in this day and age, they don't have unlimited investment on where to spend their funds, either for growth or for managing the mitigation of identified risks. So trying to set tolerances goes right into the core of determining what areas to focus on and how much to focus on those areas. So building resilience is very much linked, interconnected with identifying the tolerance around what we want to manage. And Peter's already mentioned, and I totally agree, that the tolerance setup should really be very much connected to the objectives and the risk appetite. We cannot really set tolerances out of context just because, well, it seems right to do so. There needs to be some logic and rationale behind it. I'm very much aligning it. Totally agree with the thought shared earlier about aligning it to the objectives and processes. It's all about interconnecting, as Anna said at the beginning, interconnecting all the relevant areas in a way that we're going to end up with an integrating cost environment and an integrating ecosystem of the overall factors that would be affecting in this topic. So when setting up the tolerances, the other key consideration is really to understand the scope. It's important to consider we've talked just now about the firm impact, but we also should be thinking about the customer's impact. And broadly, the partnerships that we also hold in the market. So trying to understand the impact of those partners would go a long way as well to trying to mitigate overall disruption. And overall, and we've got many examples, I'm sure we can all relate to 2008. And in those days, I was working for AIG. I'm sure in the US, AIG and the Fed and the many impact that caused in 2008, it will resonate. So it's quite important to understand what risks do for the overall industry where the organization is going to be operating. And when that happens, what impact is that going to have on the stability of the overall economy? So the other aspect to consider about the tolerances is that if we're going to do tolerance setup, what should we be taking into account? And it's important, I'm sure you can all relate, whenever we're setting any metrics, it's very important to ensure that they're going to be smart metrics. And fundamentally, like we've got on the screen, considering as primary factors the value that those metrics is going to be tracking, and trying to also concentrate on volume and time. They need to be realistic. Setting metrics out of context will do nothing to really map the investment I was referring at the beginning, or trying to drive the business decisions about how we build resilience. So it's very much, as Susan mentioned it at the beginning, important to also align with the first line, ensure that the metrics are set up and shared by those that are going to be accountable for managing them, and really ensuring that they do resonate and remain valid. Because quite a lot of the times, metrics are set, everyone is very happy that we've got a whole set of metrics and a nice red, green, or whatever color dashboard, but they do very quickly go out of context. So keeping them current is paramount.
Mm-hmm.
Another important factor in the framework is really understanding the dependencies. We've been talking along for the last few days about dependencies and interconnectedness and integration, and that's really very much applies to this as well. As we said earlier, Peter referred about the importance of outlining the processes, and the slide here is really trying to connect it to the broader aspect of the organizational hierarchy, the entities. We operate in very complex organizations these days. Many are across different countries, across in the US, across different states. To understand all these different connections and all these different factors, it's equally important in the context of building resilience. And of course, why would we do that in the overall world here that we're trying to manage? It's really understanding, as we've got on the screen, the impact around the third parties that we're going to be operating with. It's no longer, we don't live or operate in a world where business just only happens in the context of one company. The companies tend to operate in a more dynamic environment these days, and understanding these interconnections from the external point of view is also of very critical importance. So ensuring that this full picture exists, similarly that the picture is maintained current, and that the overall adjustments when systems get changed, when the organization reorganizes itself, it's maintained current is going to be going a long way to ensure that the resilience is built and managed and kept in the right areas.
Mm-hmm. And I think one of the reasons we chose this particular example of loan origination is because, for those of you who were in the United States, we know that loan origination is what was the precedent for the financial crisis, particularly in multifamily and investments in the mortgage business. So this is a really good example, because for most of us, regardless of whether we were in this banking industry or not, we've read those headlines, we've seen that happen. We know people who were impacted when the mortgage business went upside down and the valuations decreased significantly. So this example really maps back the interconnectedness of the different risk areas that each one of you are responsible for, back to a very specific business example. I think that could be helpful in bringing this case forward.
Yeah, I do agree. And it kind of ties into what you're going to be speaking now, because you need to, once we've got the accountability and the ownership shared, it's really about the validation and ensuring that the testing through the techniques you're going to describe remains valid too.
Right, and once we create a framework like that, now the interest is in doing scenario testing, right? It's really taking a page out of our BCM kind of business as we know it today and saying, what kinds of risks might we have if these different scenarios existed? And if you take a look at this slide, you'll see that we've identified, again, going back to that home loan payment example, These are the different scenarios that could exist. There could be a fraudulent payment. There could be a system down. And when we think about the very first scenario up here on the right, that's really an operational risk. When we look at the second one, where agents are asking for secure customer payment details, that's really an internal controls management around access to data. When you start thinking about a CHAP system being down, now we're talking about digital risk management. And the next one with the ledger balance being unavailable, that's business continuity. So you can see that all of these disparate parts of our organization really need to come together in order to make a scenario like this really come alive. So after we, and we can advance to the next slide, thank you. So after we create these scenarios that I just mentioned on the first page, it's really important to overlay them on our business framework and start to understand where the people, process, and system elements come into play, because all three of these elements are critical to building out this operational resiliency framework. So we're taking all the piece parts, as we talked about at the very beginning, and showing you how this information can come together in layering, taking a look at your organization, your people, your process, your channels, etc. And then the last point I really want to make here with regard to tolerance, and Victoria said it very well, each one of us have different risk tolerances that we're willing to accept. That's great, but what we need to do is plot that information in a way that's transparent and visible and can be debated. And I think the idea of taking these scenarios, looking at the risks that could occur, and deciding how much of that risk, how long is this system down, how much can I tolerate that, because maybe I have a backup process, maybe I don't. So plotting those different scenarios on a framework like this will help you get some visibility into where the focus areas need to be.
Mm-hmm.
So we're running up against time, and I'll be brief, and I've talked about this a little bit already. So if you just, if you go all the way.
Okay.
There's a lot on this slide, but I think if you take away that fact that there's a lot on this slide.
There you go.
What we're basically saying is, obviously, there's two sections: mapping the stakeholders and then building the business story. We in the risk function who are building this framework, we don't know, and this goes to the heart again, heart of GRC adoption. We don't know everything that the business does, and I think this is a payments example. And we also don't know what they would do if that, in this case, this payment system wasn't there. They know what they do, and they know what they would do if the system wasn't there. So I think, again, from a GRC perspective, that's a known unknown for us, but it's a known for them. So to capture that known information, relatively simple. And if you've got good governance and good documentation and good backup procedures, then building a DR plan for this particular case study, it really isn't that difficult. So again, GRCers like ourselves, we're building that framework and sort of centralizing and checking for the linkages up and down the hierarchy, cross left and right, making sure upstream and downstream systems are talking to each other at the time of crisis. But the business knows their stuff, would be my takeaway here, and have them, have them build this for you.
Go to the next one.
And then, testing, like with anything, and we had a discussion this morning with a customer, testing, because if you have a plan that is gathering dust on the shelf, and at time of disaster, not only do they not know what the plan says, they don't know where the shelf is to go get it, that is a problem. And we talked about Southwest, and you can talk about many other firms who have not executed well on their plan, who have lost incredible shareholder value and continue to be in the headlines. So testing.
I would just say that in our DR and BCM groups, I think they've done an incredible job of this kind of scenario analysis, tabletop exercises, and testing. But I think it's probably fair to say that those of us in operational risk, where we may have control failures that could be significant, I'm not sure that we're doing that same level of scenario analysis and testing. So I think that's really the message that we want to bring to all of you today, is this idea of thinking about operational risk and building the resiliency plans that we have done in our BCM and DR practices. Anna?
Thank you. Just on that point, I recently heard Sir Peter Wall, who's former general within the UK military, and he now works with a number of financial institutions. And one of his observations is that in the financial markets, they don't do enough testing. And his view was that you should be taking your executives out of their comfort zone and having them work on in a scenario that's not familiar to them, and to understand how they're actually going to react in a real life situation. But he said you should be testing to the point that it is second nature for how your executives will respond. So that would lead me to believe that a lot of testing should be more than once a year.
And if I can jump in, I mean, I think, for me, a call to action for this group of people is obvious. You know, if there are gaps you've identified today, you need to take those back to your firms. You know, for next, you've had the benefit of all this discussion. So for next year, I think what a real trick would be is to get those, quote unquote, executives to an event like this so they can hear it firsthand. So, because you've got a really tough job. Not only are you trying to build out GRC, you have to take all this knowledge and then translate it back to them and sort of, recycle and get them to sort of buy in. And oftentimes change is easier if it comes from somebody else. So, and I think that is a tough job. But if next time, if there's a focus on them and you could potentially get them to listen to stuff like this or read things like this, that would be, one of the things I would take away.
I totally agree, because usually that challenge comes linked with investment opportunities that will require budget and allocation.
Absolutely.
So that's where the really hard job comes.
So just some wrap-up comments for you. I think the phrase flex, not break, is a great way to think about the purpose of an operational resilience program. Is not, to help your organization be able to respond. Really focusing on mapping your critical business services end to end. Don't focus on the process. Don't look at just the silo. You're looking cross silos. So you take a product area or a service area from the point that you're going to market, touching clients, all the way through to delivery and support. So ensure that your risk appetite statement and your tolerance statement includes something about resilience across your operational risk types. Basically have strong comprehensive reporting so that you can ensure that you can continuously focus on improving your program. We've talked about scenario planning, but I think one of the gentlemen yesterday, I think from Fannie Mae, actually talked about this in terms of, or he was on the board of Comcast, excuse me. When you're doing your scenario planning, you have to look outside your company, and you have to think about the broader economic impact of a disruption. Having a comprehensive view on the dependencies of the critical business services, and then resilience considerations have to be embedded up front in the design of the organization. So yesterday morning, the CIO for the U.S. government, ex-CIO, talked about privacy by design when building products. When you're building out new products and services in your company, you should be working with that product manager to ensure that they've built in resilience in the design of their service and product. And you start it from the very beginning. So then you're developing that culture.
Can I just add to that, Anna? Because what I think is, I totally agree with your point. And I think it's also tying back to what we said yesterday about ensuring that this understanding has been built up front before later on thinking into any kind of technology. Because otherwise we would be encountering some of the issues that we've been discussing this week. So yeah, all of that and thinking it up front would definitely be key.
Yeah, and you raise the culture. Plan, test continuously. And we have 1 minute for questions. All right.
It's day 4.
Great.
It's day 4.
Day 4,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Our next session, AI Ethics and Sustainability, Avoiding Unintended Pitfalls, is on now. We're privileged to have with us today Anna Falander, co-founder of the AI Sustainability Center and advisor to the Swedish government. Anna is a highly sought-after thought leader on how digitization is affecting organizations, society, and the economy. Please join me in welcoming Anna to the stage.
Thank you. So, data about our preferences and behavior is the new gold. We are entering a data-driven era where everyone needs to embrace AI for operational efficiency and to deeper client relationships. So clients expect customized, personalized recommendations and services. And if you don't live up to these expectations, you will quick lose relevance. We see there's an increasing divide between leaders and laggers. So AI, as you know, creates enormous values for individuals, society, and organizations. Yet, there are risks. The technology is galloping, and the profits could sometimes be seductive. Yet both the risks and the values of AI is hard to capture. And then they are unequally distributed. My name is Anna Falander, and I am thrilled to be here today to speak about AI sustainability, meaning embracing AI by identifying, measuring, and governing how AI is scaling in a broader ethical and societal context, about avoiding unintended pitfalls. So AI is nothing new, yet we're at the stage right now when mature technologies cross-fertilize. So we can store, process data cheaper, but most importantly, the vast amount of input data for the algorithm to work on is becoming exponential through sensors, face, voice, speak. So we ask AI to make subjective decisions on imperfect information. How does that sound for you? Yet, now we have this combined vast data sets that makes the algorithm learn to become an extended and augmented human brain. So again, as an economist, we look at digital or technological paradigm shift through general purpose technology. And general purpose technology is defining what characterize the digital or technological paradigm shift by 3 waves with the same generic underlying technology. So the first wave, there's a low maturity of the technology. And in the second wave, there's a widespread use. And in the third wave, there's a cross-fertilization both between sectors and the different technical solutions. So if we look at digitalization from a general purpose technology perspective, we've already seen how the first wave, the IT boom and crash, with a lot of visible productivity gains through to the hardware development. Now, the second wave, and I would say that we are on the verge of entering the third wave. So the second wave has been characterized by being extremely consumer-driven, disruptive value chains, price models, and competitive situations. Yet, most importantly, it has shifted power to the consumers by transparency, by trust between peers, by slashed middle hands being replaced by validation on the social platform. These values are not captured in the official statistics. So economists wonder, what is the gain of digitalization? What is this all about when there's no productivity increase in the statistics? There are different, I spend a lot of time on this, but to be short on it, it's about both measurement due to pricing models, but it's also the value creation of a consumer surplus. So if you think about what your banking app gives you, it's leisure time, right? And that's positive. It's a consumer surplus that is not available in the official statistics. I'm not going to linger on that because what's important now is to take the step and describe the third wave of digitalization. This is when I said that the cross-fertilization of mature technologies. This is where the risks are not captured. This is where the transparency is shifted or might be shifted into a black box phenomena. And why is this? Well, there's two sides of the AI coin. The engineering side, but the other side is the humanistics. How AI is scaling in society. So there's a lot of investments that has been put into the engineering side. And some critics argue that artificial intelligence is an experiment that we don't bother to look at the results on society. So we should not ask, what can AI do? We should ask, what should AI do? And also, humans should lead AI and not the other way around. So artificial intelligence is different. It's different because it's self-learning, it's self-propagating, and it's self-scaling. And since a lot of resources have been invested in the tech side of the AI coin, there hasn't been enough exploration and research on how it's scaling, and thus our need for explainability and transparency and accountability. So algorithms are often targeted towards goals such as profits, increased sales, or clicks, or deepening client relationships or engagement. And the algorithm will do what you tell it to do. But along the way, it can take decisions with an ethical dimension that is hard to capture. So if you put artificial intelligence into a traditional business model, you push down costs, reduce all spill in your value chain, enormous cost efficiency, and you increase revenues by locking in your clients and creating a lot of value in your personalized recommendations. So we never had to ask between efficiency and moral. We say that technology is good, and we put it in to make processes efficient and to make clients happy. But what if there's a split between efficiency and moral and we cannot capture it? What comes out of this extremely on-speed business model with AI is a new type of negative externality, a new type of pollution that we have not yet incorporated for. Compare this to when you have the large industrial organization polluting. And in the beginning, they had a lot of high margins because they were first. And then the regulatory framework and the sanctions begin to adopt for this. I will get back to the regulatory blind spot, but we are not even far from doing it right yet. All organizations need to be responsible for their clients' data and how it is used and what kind of impact that has on society. You can no longer say, we didn't know. So we need to demystify the black cloud of new type of pollutions. So my research team has done this and categorized the unintended negative pitfalls into 4 categories. So let me walk you through these. First, we have the misuse or overuse of data. So even though you are GDPR compliant, artificial intelligence can create intelligence that could be privacy intrusive for you. So one of our researchers has done work on the integrity paradox. What we say and claim to ourselves and our surrounding is our integrity is not the same as the footprint, our digital footprints. And let's think about why that is so. Lack of understanding or low moral. So there's actually an exchange between giving away our integrity for achieving convenient services, time optimization, and efficiency. But let's take an example. Let's take Amazon as an example. They're really early movers, and they've really gained a fast monopoly situation. First, they recommend you services and stuff, right? They work with the last mile, and they give you a lot of conveniency. So what you give away by this universe they've created for you it's pretty worth it for you. It's convenient and it's pretty. It's actually a good exchange of integrity and convenience. Yet when you bring in Alexa in your room, it's suddenly, maybe without knowledge, a shift and an imbalance between the exchange. So this is the time of pollution when there's so much integrity that is polluted into Amazon or third parties to capitalize on. The bias of the creator, the second pitfall, is when the programmer intentionally or unintentionally programs his or her values. And to be honest, and not judging, the average programmer is not aware of how the algorithm or the application is scaling in a broader context. So let me give you an example of a famous American coffee house chain that worked with artificial intelligence in marketing for upsales. So the goal here was really to increase sales. And of course, this was very effective because along the day with these patterns and preferences, you really were getting what you wanted before you even knew that you wanted it. So the marketing team was really successful. So in the youngest cohort, it actually did upsells up to 6,000 calories. So the algorithm had learned along the way that the margins on sugar were so much higher than on coffee. So it pushed a lot of sugars in the young cohorts. What is a sustainable sugar consumption and who's responsible? The third category, immature AI. It's when the data is not structured enough or you don't have sufficient or enough data, or when you haven't trained your algorithm enough. What about face recognition? Discriminating Asians by asking them to open their eyes, or working worse on dark-skinned women. We need a threshold for go-to-market when it comes to AI applications, right? The fourth category, this data machine bias, is the most well-known and most studied, when the data is not reflecting the reality or the preferred reality. But who's to say? So for example, in an HR AI application, the AI learns that the word execution in a CV is working really fine to define what a successful CEO is. But that is prolonging old prejudices on gender and leadership into the future. These are the pollutions. This is the discrimination, the privacy intrusion, the misinterpretations, the social exclusion, and the segregation that is a new type of negative externality. An algorithm is actually built upon using your vulnerabilities. By nudging in your weak spot into buying something or deciding something. It's tilting you into the preferred road in the future. But when does this have an ethical implication, and what is a profitable or profitable-driven company's responsibility in this? As I said, the regulatory framework is lagging. So if we see the regulatory pendulum hitting too fast by these pollutions, it will hamper innovation and productivity. And yet there are so many different stakes in different sectors. For example, in the financial sector, it's extremely sensitive data, such as in health, whereas in retail it might be not so. So we have to identify the different stakes. If the regulatory pendulum doesn't strike at all, we will have a lot of mistrust towards both the technology and the institutions using it. So when it comes to lagging regulations, it's a lot of EU, for example, and World Economic Forum have initiated AI ethics standards, and so has the large giants such as Google and Microsoft. These are our AI principles. They're mostly about transparency, explainability, and being fair. But how do you sustain that in your organizations? How do you make sure that what you say you do is actually coded in your AI applications? So with the lagging regulatory framework, organizations need to stand accountable for the ethical agenda. I would say that both consumers and citizens are going to demand transparency and explainability in order to exchange their integrity. So there is a trade-off between explainability and transparency and the reliability of the outcome in the AI model. So if you want to be super good, you can't explain it. So you have to be a bit slower and less efficient. But there's no trade-off between being transparent, proactive, and accountable towards your clients, because trust is key here. So what you need to do is you need to put the ethical questions on top of the agenda and really be precise. Because you have to code what is a sustainable credit consumption. You have to decide on how much integrity you tend to use. Or if you want to back off and say, we do not use demographic data. We're not interested in your zip codes, because we would probably not serve you the first if we knew where you lived. So there's a lot of ethical questions that could be uncomfortable because you have to say stop. So this is what we work with our organizations in the AI Sustainability Center. We have this sustainability lens with a technical, legal, societal, and ethical perspective. Our goal is to help our partner organizations to sustain their ethical values into the AI application and how it's scaled, to avoid unintended pitfalls, to make them ready for upcoming standards and regulation, and to make them competitive by being trustworthy and proactive. We use this, the goal is to have them all AI sustainable. We work towards decreasing the pitfalls by controlling for our fundamentals. So we scan the whole world for these principles and find that we believe that accountability, transparency, explainability, and governance is crucial to score high on. So the framework has different phases. The first phase is to do the risk scanning and see how is your AI sustainability risk profile. And then you get an indication of risk area indication. Where in your organization are you weak? And then we go along with a risk heat mapping and a gap analysis. You say you're this, but this is where you are. I don't want to point fingers, but I think the gap analysis of those organizations that has been too early in stating they're going to be so fair and explainable, it might be a gap here. So we do a gap analysis and then we come up with risk recommendations how we mitigate these gaps. So society is increasingly worried about AI and the implications for human beings. So today's business profits are consolidated into a few, but with the cost of the integrity of many. So the seductive gains and revenues and the pollution coming out from that needs to be incorporated into the business model to create trust. So it is time for us to identify new way to tangle or handle these risks, and it's time to change the business model. Thank you. You now, with Michael coming up on stage.
Thank you very much for those words of wisdom. I appreciate it very much. In fact, we started the conference with on the topic of unknown unknowns. We have lived in a world where a lot of new risks, operational risks, has been introduced. Cyber, you mentioned it in your presentation. And now we hear new terms: privacy erosion, data pollution, the ethical agenda. Are we seeing new unknown risks emerging, and how do you see that? What do you think those kind of risks will be?
So first of all, these risks will be in referring to AI. And why I'm saying that is because it's not right now the blockchain or virtual reality. The artificial intelligence. Let me do a historical contemplation. So as an economist, again, we always look at technological paradigm shift. We always look at what is it that has drastically reduced costs. Mm-hmm. And looking historically, it's been that drastically reduced cost of production and then transportation and then information flow and exchange. And now it's drastically reduced cost on making predictions. That's AI, and that's why the unknown will be in the AI area, because the risks, as the gains are exponential, so is the risks. Right. So, but what's interesting, I was working at the Ministry of Finance in Sweden prior to the IT crash, Lehman Brothers financial crisis, and we all, as well-trained economists, looked at those. We did the programming right, we did all the forecasting tools, and we couldn't see it. We couldn't see it. And then when it all emerged, I started working, coordinating at the Prime Minister's office, risk management coordination unit, and then the risk area with the financial and economic perspective hadn't been applied. So it's always, the risk management had always been about when there was a hurricane or something. So what is so important is both to have training or cross-functional teams and looking and moving over silos in an organization.
I appreciate that. So in the industrial age, we saw all the benefits in the beginning, and we didn't see the cost. We didn't see the impact on the environment. And when we reached that point, we realized we have to change our ways. We started to get into the sustainable period of the industrialization. AI, we see all the benefits. We are leveraging them at full. When do you think we're going to reach a tipping point when we understand the cost of AI enough, the ethics that we have to give up? When will that be balanced? How do we reach sustainability?
We're very soon. I guess you all read the Taleb's book on the black swan. He recently published another book called Skin in the Game that says that if it's not affecting, you take larger risks if you don't have a skin in the game of what comes out. And I think here we realize at this moment that we are all an experiment for this, and we can all be we can be a victim of discrimination or faulty recommendation. So I think we're at the tipping point now, and the actors that are first mover within their industry is going to gain a lot of trust. And what is trust? That's your clients giving away the new type of currency, their integrity. So in the best area, there could be a really perfect line of level of explainability so I understand it, and transparency in the way that everything can't be transparent because you're going to game against it and you can have a society where you don't want to end up. So there's a lot of fine-tuning in regulations and standards here, but we really, you cannot wait for I mean, EU, for example, has their AI standards, and you cannot wait. No one is going to tell you how you're going to be transparent, and for your client, what is transparency? So it's really up to the organizations to be proactive and responsible in this area.
Awesome. So if the next big unknown is AI, and the opportunity to be the first mover on the ethics agenda is to gain trust for every consumer and make the world a better, as we know it, a better place. What are the 3 things we need to do to be the first ones to make it there?
Well, I suggest to be joining the center's movement and be part of our multidisciplinary research and be part of the multi-stakeholder engagement so you get the voice of the human rights perspective and public agencies, because we need to work together on this. And then I would suggest to do a first risk scanning, to just see and analyze where am I at in my organization, where do we stand right now? Where are our vulnerabilities, both in our non-technical and in our technical parts of the solution of the organizations. And then the third part would be to start thinking about translating your values and ethical principles into the AI world and say, this is our AI ethical principles. But before that, make sure that you can guarantee and ensure that they are sustained. So what we're doing, we're giving an insurance. We're not saying you will always be ethical because you worked with us. We're saying you're taking those steps. You've done this in a systematic way, and this is our risk mitigation plan, and this is how we say in our towards our stakeholders and in our environments towards our clients, this is how we want to do this right. We want to be on the good side of embracing AI, meaning that the deep learning, like the really cool stuff you can do with AI, you might want to slow it down some.
Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should.
No, and just stating, because we work with companies that are so good and smart, and the ones that are successful say, well, we choose not to do that.
Right.
We can, but we choose not to.
I know this is fantastic. We started the conference hearing from Jim Quigley about the unknown. AI is a big risk that we're all facing. It's also a major opportunity. I think what Quigley taught us was that it's about gaining knowledge about the new emerging risks. Anna has helped us do so. In fact, she's inviting you to join the movement that's backed very strongly by the Nordic governments, but also the EU government, and I know several of the universities, leading universities on this topic right here in the US. And Metric Stream certainly will partner up to then help with the risk assessment, and we are proud to be a partner and part of this ethics movement. So thank you very much, Anna, for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We've had an amazing 2 days, and now I'm sure we're all ready for the final and original act. Please join me in welcoming our founder and chairman, Gunjan Sinha to the stage.
All right. Thanks for inviting. How's everybody doing? Okay. So in 2012, a few years back, I gave a TED talk which was on this topic of serendipity. And many of you know the meaning of the word, but to refresh our memories, serendipity means accidental discovery of good things. Magic that moves us. I'm going to try to pull off our magic today. So 3 years back, we chose Baltimore as the place where we're going to host GRC Summit. And it was a magical discovery at the time. But today it is my pleasure to curate another serendipity here as I present a surprise guest before I kick off my session. And this guest is none other than Steve Waugh, who's the state senator from Maryland, who's personally here to thank us all to convene here to do our GRC Summit. Before I get him to come here, I have to tell you a little bit about Steve, which is what got me very excited. So firstly, he's an amazing engineer, a problem solver, like all of us, right? He's extraordinary, he's imaginative, he's bold, he's exceptionally driven, and he's a political leader, but compassionate. He served in the US Marine Corps, flying the AV-888B Harrier aircraft with operational deployments on board ships. And it's one of the most legendary combat aircraft in the world, and it can take off and land vertically. So you can imagine the maneuver. It's not easy, and he's going to talk about that. But since he entered politics in 2008, and from 2015 to 2018, he was actually the state senator here, he is considered one of the most effective Republican legislators. And the thing that he introduced, the bills that he introduced, one of them, which went into law, was the Maryland Safe to Learn Act, which he did in the schools after being inspired by some of the gun violence that happened in Florida. So here's a man who believes in action, who believes in compassion, and who believes to make the world a better place. So please join hands to welcome Steve Waugh right here.
Thank you, Gunjan.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. I'm going to pace a little bit, so hopefully I don't make anybody nervous. I promise I won't pounce. First off, I want to welcome everyone to Baltimore, and particularly all of the folks that have traveled from around the world to come to Charm City. We love it here. I've been in and out of Baltimore my whole life. It's just a wonderful place. I'm actually from Southern Maryland, but I represented Calvert and St. Mary's County in the state legislature. So if you have a chance, come down to Annapolis and visit the state capitol. It's actually the first capital of the United States. It was the capital 3 different times. It's where George Washington resigned his commission to the Continental Congress. So there's a lot of history here in Maryland, so let me welcome you to Baltimore and to the Free State. So Gunjan asked me to tell you a couple of stories about some risks that I dealt with over my years in the Marines and in the legislature. So let me first tell you the story about flying the AV-8B. Some of you may have seen it at an air show. It's the jump jet. It takes off and lands vertically. And I'll tell you, it is absolutely a blast to fly. And when we deploy, we can deploy ashore or at sea, and we go out on the amphibious assault ships. Now, these are the small aircraft carriers. They're not the nuclear carriers. They're built for helicopters, so there's no catapult, there's no arresting gear. But these are some of the largest warships in the world. And USS Tarawa is 40,000 tons of steel. It's over 800 feet long, 3,000 sailors and Marines. And when I deployed on it in '96, we had 35 helicopters and 6 jets. And we were going towards Kuwait. Now, flying the Harrier, you may have heard, it's a risky aircraft. And in fact, it has the highest mishap rate of any jet in the Department of Defense. And I'm sad to say I actually lost about 24 of my friends to that aircraft. So, you know, it's risky on a good day, and at sea, even more so. And at night, at sea, I can tell you, it's just sheer terror. So operational risk management is pretty much a way of life, literally, for a Harrier pilot. So let me tell you about the ship. Now, the ship is basically a moving airport, and like an airport, it has lights, it has radio navigation beacons, and they have radars. And all of these are designed to help recover aircraft, particularly in bad weather. And the jets and the helicopters in the Navy are similarly equipped. You have lights, you have radio navigation equipment, but you don't necessarily have a radar. And in my case, in 1996, we had the first jets that had GPS integrated into the inertial system. So we knew where we were, plus or minus about 5 meters, which was really awesome back then. Now, the other thing is when anything breaks, whether it breaks on the ship or on an airplane, it generates a maintenance report. So here's some data, right? Anything that pops up, it immediately gets put into the daily maintenance report, and those reports go all the way through the chain of command to the Pentagon. The ship stuff goes to N96, and the airplane stuff goes to N98. These are different offices, different hallways in the Pentagon, separated by about 10 feet of concrete. So that's good and bad. You can go in on any given day and press a button, and you can see the status of every aircraft and every ship in the Navy, and you can know what's broke, and is it awaiting maintenance or is it awaiting parts. So you can actually press a list and see all of the parts that are on order for the Department of the Navy. What you don't see is how much risk is associated with each one of those parts. So let me talk about one risk that we identified. About 3 days out of port from San Diego, the three-dimensional radar went down on our ship. This is the radar that we use to guide aircraft back in for landing. This is assessed as a very big risk. On a nuclear aircraft carrier, they don't let that be broke for more than 72 hours. They move heaven and earth. Now, on the second-tier ships, not so much. A little less interest, a little less effect. When 2 months later, the commander of the 7th Fleet came aboard our ship, young Captain Waugh provided him his personal risk assessment, which was not welcomed, and the Navy chose to continue to mitigate it in their normal way, which was, number one, hey, parts are on order. Number two, you have the backup radio navigation beacon, and that always works as long as it's dry. So number three, try to avoid foul weather. However, we are in the Western Pacific. So fundamentally, the Navy had accepted the risk. Okay, so let's go ahead and track this risk. About 2 months later, once again, we are in the middle of the Pacific. And I am telling you, you don't know what the middle of the Pacific is until you've been there. We are more than 1,000 miles from the nearest land, no kidding. And there's an overcast layer, which when you're in the middle of the ocean, you really can't tell how high the clouds are. You have no point of reference. Weatherman says, well, those clouds are at 2,000 feet and it's a thin overcast, don't worry, be happy. We line up 4 jets and lead aircraft gets launched into the clouds. I go into the clouds at 200 feet, not 2,000 feet. And I keep going and going and going. I finally break out at 5,000 feet. This is a very thick overcast. But hey, every day is a great day on top of the clouds, so we launch 2, 3, and 4. They come up and join me, and we start our air-to-air dogfighting training. After the first engagement, you get that really ominous call on the radio saying, black sheep, go max conserve now. This is not what you want to hear when you have 45 minutes of gas remaining. I look down, and my TACAN is spinning. So what's happened is the ship drove into a fog bank and turned, tried to get out of it, and then turned, and then turned. So now the ship is lost, the TACAN is wet, and the radar does not work. All of our normal methods of getting back aboard ship are gone. So I have some time to contemplate whether or not I can actually swim back to California, or if I want to audition for the movie Castaway. Anyway, after a little bit of thought, I called down on the radio, and I said, hey, I got an idea. Shoot me. This is a little unorthodox, but I convinced the ship to basically turn on its self-defenses. So they turn on their gun direction radar, which then can tell them how far away I am, and my radar warning receiver can tell me what direction they are. So basically, I put the spike on the nose, and I start descending, and I go lower and slower and lower and slower. I finally break out at about 50 feet, going about 50 knots. So if you were to walk out and look off the balcony on the glass, you would be looking down on my jet as I was going past. I finally break out of the clouds. I see the bottom half of the ship, can't see the top half, trundle over, and I actually had to climb across the deck edge. So I managed to survive. We bring down 2, 3, and 4 and repeat the process. So good news is it all worked. But think about what would have happened if this had been at night. Absolutely would have lost all 4 jets. Absolutely would have lost all 4 pilots. My wife would be wealthy and married to the pool boy, but it wouldn't have worked out as well for me. So consider what the operational impact would be of losing 4 jets in a matter of 15 minutes. What would have been the reputational disaster for the Department of the Navy and the United States Marine Corps if that had happened? Don't be me. All right, let me talk about the second one, talking about the legislature in Annapolis. It's interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed and was deeply honored to serve in the Maryland State Senate. And there's been a great deal of discussion today about cybersecurity. And as you might imagine, since the 2016 elections, there's been a great deal of discussion about election security here in the United States. I'm sad to report that while there has been a lot of talk, there has been precious little action. So let me describe, for those of you, particularly the folks from coming overseas, I want to give a big shout out to all of our friends from India who just conducted the largest democratic election in human history. $600 million people voted. That's just amazing. It's mind-boggling. Well, here in Maryland, you can register to vote online. You can request an absentee ballot online. You can print your ballot at home, fill it out, and mail it in. You can do all of these things without ever actually laying eyes on another person. So that's our system. Now, for the cybersecurity experts here, think about, you've got an entire voter registration database, millions of people, all online. On election day, if you walk into one of the 2,000 precincts in the state of Maryland, you walk in, you check in, you say, "Hi, I'm Steve Waugh." They look you up on a database and they say, "Yes, all right, indeed, you're a registered voter." They give you a hardware token, and then you go to step 2. You walk over to an electronic voting machine, you slide in the token, your electronic ballot pops up. On the touch screen, you select who you're going to vote for. I'm going to vote for Steve Waugh, at least once. Print your ballot. Now you take that receipt, you walk over to the scanning machine. Step 3, you feed your ballot into the scanner, and it counts your votes and tabulates. Okay? Now, that electronic scanning machine is connected to an external USB drive and may or may not have a modem installed. At the end of the day, step 4, the precinct then reports their results, either by phone or electronically, to the election board in the county and in the state. Right? So the election board then, next step, takes their servers and they tabulate all the results from all of the precincts in the county, all of the precincts in the state. The results then transferred, the final step, to the state web servers and published. Here are the results of the election. Now, if you're a cybersecurity expert and you're feeling a little bit nervous, you are in good company. But, hey, what could happen, right? What could go wrong? Well, I got to tell you, so we have an identified risk, right? There are foreign governments out there that want to disrupt United States elections. You don't have to be a cybersecurity expert or a rocket scientist to assess this risk. But what do we do about mitigation? Sad to say, nothing. Absolutely nothing. We had an external independent audit. We had joint hearings. We had select committee hearings. And at the end of the day, we did nothing. Why? Well, because in order to do things politically, not only do you have to have the authority and you have to have the funding, most importantly, you must have the willpower to do it. And the will to do things, often in the political world, is driven by what are your campaign objectives. So if this isn't on the critical path for the next election, it goes to the back of the room. This is sad. I will tell you that some people do care about it, and Senator Lee, one of my colleagues from Montgomery County, she put in a bill 3 years running trying to force the State Department of IT to use the NIST cybersecurity framework in their departmental strategy. But unfortunately, that bill never made it out of committee. But hey, what could happen? What could go wrong, right? All right, well, I want to once again welcome you to the city of Baltimore and to the Baltimore hostage crisis. We are in day 29 of a ransomware attack here in the city of Baltimore, if you were not aware. On May 7th, the new cyber Barbary pirates took the city's servers hostage. They shut everything down. This is pretty extraordinary. Now, the mayor has wisely chosen that he will not pay tribute. The pirates demanded $100,000 in Bitcoin. He has refused to pay. But unfortunately, the costs now are estimated at $18 million and climbing. And this is because the ransomware attack has shut down pretty much everything. Email, phones, the finance system, IT, you name it, it's gone. And this is the City Council, the Department of Housing, Parks and Recs, real estate, finance, everything. It's all shut down. The only thing that the ransomware attack left in place were emergency services, so 911 still works. So I'm sad to say there is no way of knowing, is this vandalism, is this crime, is this terrorism, or is this an act of war? We don't know. There is no international law on cyber warfare. There is no Geneva Convention on cyber warfare. Back when I was in the Marine Corps, Tom Clancy wrote a book, Sum of All Fears. And the basis of it was the very deep fear that some terrorist organization might get control of an old Soviet nuke and use it on Baltimore. There are people today that believe that this ransomware attack is actually an exploit of an old compromised NSA tool. So we are now living it. Let's put this into some perspective that will be, I think, applicable for folks here at the GRC conference. Think about the business continuity implications. So the city has been more or less shut down for 4 weeks, and it's going to take months to reconstitute basically everything. Think about the financial risk. So not only can the city not collect fees, it can't issue licenses, it can't issue permits, can't collect taxes, can't generate revenue, can't pay bonds. Think about the audit implications of this cyber attack. The cyber pirates have wiped out all of the city's data prior to May 7th. All of it. It's gone. What are you going to audit? So I think both of those situations, while they're not really rousing and exciting, they're kind of examples of what not to do. And they are certainly things to think about as you are assessing your own risk and your own deployment of systems like GRC within your own enterprises. So once again, what I do want to do is welcome you not only to the state of Maryland and not only to Charm City, Baltimore here, and thank you again for coming down. I want to invite you to get down to the Inner Harbor if you haven't already. It is crab season. Get yourself a crab cake and eat it looking out onto the USS Constellation, one of the original 6 frigates of the United States Navy that 200 years ago Thomas Jefferson sent to fight the original Barbary pirates. So thank you again for having me. Sanjay?
Yeah, no, that was perfect. That was amazing. Thank you. And one of the things in one of the stories that people tell in Silicon Valley in the world of entrepreneurship and innovation and this is something that you'll hear from many of the entrepreneurs who have built amazing companies, is till you almost down an F-16, you don't become a fighter pilot. And the reason we say that is behind every successful company, whether you look at Cisco or Intuit or Google or I don't care, there was a moment in time in their history when they almost were going to go out. And then they survive, and then they thrive, and then they rule the world. So that's life, and that's business, and that's what we heard from Steve in both the stories as how what he dealt with in his Marine career, and hopefully as Baltimore will flourish, post this massive attack that they've had. So that's the context, but let's reflect back on the last couple of days. We've had an amazing 2 days, right? And hopefully you guys enjoyed the cruise and the dinner and the drinks, and especially the karaoke. So I don't know if some of you guys were there, and I saw the special talents that I now know who to call on for what song moving forward. So that was very special. But beyond the evening, but I also really enjoyed some of the sessions, the panels, the discussions, the keynotes. It was an amazing, amazing repertoire of things that we did together for the last 2 days. So incredible thanks to all of the speakers, participants, as well as Team Metric Stream for putting it all together. So thank you. So this event, we started this in 2013. Every year it keeps getting bigger and better and nicer, and I can feel it. And hopefully you guys feel it. So it's really nice to see familiar faces. What I love about it is, this is the place where I look forward to coming because I get to meet old friends. And we have become friends because we come to this event every year. And that's a great feeling. I call it the GRC family. And hopefully you guys feel the same way. So you come here not just for the learning or the knowledge or the networking, but you call this your home. And I wanted Steve here because I want him to remind us that Baltimore is our home for 2 days in a year. I truly get inspired by your work. And I saw that in the talks, the sessions, the panels, the discussions that happened. And your work on various aspects of GRC is very, very inspirational to me personally. It's all the good work that you do that keeps GRC moving. It's our work at Metric Stream that keeps GRC moving. And it's the work of our partners who are tirelessly helping deploy, implement, and really create the value around all of us. That's also equally and significantly important. So it's the collective energy that I see which inspires us all. And I also feel that GRC has really hit the mainstream now. It's visible that in business now, there isn't a company which can deal without having an effective GRC strategy. It's not just limited to financial services or healthcare or the regulated industries across the board. If you don't know or understand GRC today, you do not have the right to be in business at some level. So our vision of Metric Stream, which 15 years back sounded like a dream or a vision, but today I can see it full circle in action as I heard all of you guys speak. So that's basically, very rewarding to see that. Yesterday, Michael, kicked it off the day before, actually, on this whole notion of perform with integrity, the mission that he drafted last year, and that's been governing and driving Metric Stream, but also many of the organizations and companies that we collectively serve. So the notion of perform with integrity is a very powerful one, and I want to make sure that we continue to drive that agenda in our respective organizations so that that becomes the motto, the manifesto that makes GRC real and significant. And that, to me, is the essence of inspired leadership. I talked about inspired leadership last year at the GRC Summit when I did my keynote, and I feel that many of you here in the room now represent that inspired leadership because I'm sure you guys picked up on that. All through the 3 days of session, I heard words like integrity, ethics, purpose, all of the things that stand for inspired leaders. So I feel very good about the progress we have made over the last year. We have taken the discussion to a next level, beyond process and systems and tools to how do we think about perform with integrity. We are making GRC simpler, we're making it more pervasive, and we're changing and thinking about how to change the whole dynamics of the lines of defenses, first line, second line, third line. So we have fundamentally the opportunity together now to redefine how the business landscape, how the organizational landscape can be rethought of as inspired leaders. So I'm going to attempt to talk about a notion that's been on my mind. How do we as GRC professionals really shape the future of our respective organizations? And I'm going to challenge all of us to think about not just within the four walls of the GRC practice that we have, but how do we become the modern architects of the modern enterprise? And that's the challenge that's on my mind, and I hope all of you guys think about that, what I call the organization of the future. So I see 5 key pillars for the organization of the future. And I was very, very pleased and genuinely pleased to see all of these 5 things were really well discussed throughout the last 2.5 days. For example, the first thing I feel organizations of the future have to be purpose-driven. They have to be diverse and inclusive. They have to have empowered lines of defense. They have to be powered by ethical data. And then they have to be socially conscious. So let me talk about purpose-driven. As GRC professionals, we have to really evangelize the purpose of the organization. That's very, very important, because that's what makes us go beyond performance to the purpose. The way I would tell the story here is, if you think performance is the king or queen, I want to be politically correct to say it the right way. Purpose and culture is the ace. So we've got to keep this image in our mind, because it's extremely important in the world in which we are moving. Purpose has to be at the front and center of our each and every organization. And as GRC professionals, it's our charter to make sure that we talk about purpose and we educate and train all lines of defenses around the notion of the organizational purpose. Because that purpose has to allow people to learn how to perform with integrity. We have to help our leaders set the tone from the top. But we also have to educate and inspire the first line to perform with integrity and purpose. I think Ken Bacon, on one of the panels, he was there, he said very aptly on day one, we just must simply learn to do the right thing. I love that statement. He said it with real simple words, just do the right things. Fund managers in Wall Street now are increasingly looking at ESG, environmental, social, governance indices of the business before they invest. So it's good for your shareholders to care about purpose. One of our customers, and I met them 6 months back approximately, and they have declared the month of October as their GRC awareness month, the entire month. And from the CEO down to across all the offices globally, they talk about purpose, their governance, their sustainability, and all of those issues that are important. I love that, because that gives a way for the company to celebrate in 1 month in a year how to think about GRC and our common purpose. So GRC is not just about technology, it's not just about process and controls and risk and all of those things, it's about culture and purpose. Because when you tool the culture and purpose, guess what? Our jobs at the back end becomes that much easier. So that's what inspired leaders do. And I see many of you as inspired leaders right here in the room. So we should collectively take on the challenge of shaping the culture and purpose of our respective organizations. So the second key pillar, in my mind, for the organization of the future is to think about diversity. And this is, again, a topic which is very near and dear to me. Over the last, I would say, year, I have had conversations with a number of senior HR executives globally of multinational companies. and I've talked to chief diversity officers, and I've talked to CEOs on this topic. And diversity and inclusiveness, in my mind, is our wedge. When I say our, it's the GRC wedge into HR. We need to think about that, why it matters. When you create diversity, it's not just about social good. I mean, that's clearly is one of the main things, but it also helps us to perform with integrity. It creates checks and balances by design. It ensures that we minimize special clubs, privileges, entitlements, things that you don't want to have in organizations, and it breaks down silos. So fundamentally, diversity helps support our GRC journey that helps us do our jobs better. And one of the byproducts of doing this is also that diversity is known to create more innovation because you are open to diverse and inclusive ideas. So you get double effect. So we should be thinking about how to pick up the phone and go across and talk to your global head of HR, the chief talent officer, somebody who has an eye to the CEO and then the ear to the CEO, and start talking about where does GRC and diversity and talent intersect here. The time for doing this is now. And the reason I say this is literally over the last year, I have had conversations personally with CEOs and chief talent officers and chief diversity officers, and they are very, very intrigued by GRC. They don't know much about GRC, but they're very intrigued by GRC. So one of my call to action to all of you guys is, just go out, have lunch with them, talk to them about what we do, and see what resonance that creates for you to your GRC journey. So that was the second point I wanted to highlight in the organizational design of the future. The third key pillar in my mind is what came across many a time yesterday and day before was the empowerment of the first line. And I love this picture. It's a very simple picture, but it tells the story of the empowerment of the first line. And some of us are taller and smarter, and I'm not going to call it which line is that, and some of us are right in the middle, and then there are this little kid here, who really wants to watch the game of business and risk management and everything else, but can't see anything, right? And that's your 100,000 employees around the world. Imagine if we start to figure out how to empower them. How do we take that box and move it around to that little kid in the first line who should get empowered because now he can participate or she can participate in the game of risk management and sustainability and integrity and everything else that we want to do ourselves. Because that's when the magic happens, when everybody's participating and everybody's seeing the game and participating in it. So to me, Sarah from Wells Fargo, she said it in one of the panels, if you remember, everyone is a risk manager at some level, right? So we must be able to identify support structures like what we're doing here in this picture to get all the three lines being empowered. And through technology, it is indeed possible to do that. Because you know what? We can find what's simple here. What do we need to do to support this guy? How do we do that? And that's the art of what our GRC journey should be. So this is basically about enabling the front line to make risk-weighted business decisions. That should be our vision. I want to see risk at the point of action and decision-making. Imagine that future where they know exactly the consequences of the action every time, in every bite size of decision-making that's happening. And that's where that empowerment can happen now in the age of big data, in the age of AI and everything else that we've touched upon. Ultimately, this builds the right bridges, it boosts knowledge, and it builds consensus, which are all very important things, building these bridges. John Beeler, who was here earlier, I think day one, he talked about, from his experiences at Salesforce.com, that building these bridges is extremely critical, and that's what they did at Salesforce.com that was extremely powerful and that worked very well for them. So we have to know how we do these, how do we build bridges, how do we get more knowledge across to the greater pool of audiences, and how do we build consensus. So that's the third thing which I want us all to go back and think about. How do we empower the first line, that little kid in my picture? So the fourth key foundation for the organization of the future is again, has come up many a time, is I would call ethical data. So the ethical data, it's not just about data, it's about ethical data. A number of people talked about ethics, and a number of people also talked about data. But the whole notion of ethical data, to me, is about how do we build this foundation of data. So data, to me, is at the heart of every organization. It's the lifeblood. It's something that flows across the organization. And we have to think about topics like data mobility. How does that happen? Data friction. What does that mean? Where does it accelerate and where does it deaccelerate? What should be our governance and integrity standards on data? What does data obfuscation mean? What does anonymization mean? What does encryption mean? What does data security mean? And ultimately about ethical data economics. Data economics is an important topic for us to reflect on. So the age of data is here, and on top of this ethical data, we need to build the fifth key foundation, which is what I would call, and you heard in the earlier session on AI sustainability, on human-centered AI. Just because you can, you shouldn't. You have to make conscious choices. So we have to think about socially conscious AI. So AI for GRC is here today. You've heard Michael talk about it, Andy touched upon it, Vidya talked about it in their sessions about AI for GRC. It's here today with M7. You guys, every one of you here, have come up to us with use cases, and I'm so excited to see that those discussions have begun now. I've had at least half a dozen people come saying, do you think we can achieve this through AI? Do we think we can do this through a data lake or something else? So people's energy is now flowing in this direction. That's distinctively exciting from that perspective. So AI for GRC is here now. Over the next few years, we're going to shape the journey on AI, and we're going to do it in a socially conscious way. But beyond the AI for GRC, you may have picked up on this, but Michael also touched upon another very important concept, is what I would call GRC for AI. How do you govern the bots and AI themselves? This is the next horizon, which is going to be a very exciting journey, and MetricStream is better positioned than anybody else on the planet, along with your help, to solve that problem. We have been thinking about GRC for the last 15 years. Over the next decade, we have the chance and opportunity to shape the thinking on GRC for AI. How does AI itself gets governed and risk managed and be compliant? For example, let's take an example of an autonomous vehicle. How do you make choices in automated decisions for an autonomous vehicle? Who should get hurt if an accident is imminent? The driver, the car in front, or the pedestrian on the side? What choices do we need to make? And how do we create laws, governance, risk, compliance, regulations all around it? These are unknown issues that we have to go solve together over the next 5, 10 years. So that's basically the opportunity and excitement that's in front of us all. And I feel that a sense of that this journey we are taking together, and that's where we will shape the future. So the organizations of the future will have these 5 key things. Just to refresh, the performance to purpose. You have to think about instead of a siloed approach to a diverse and inclusive approach. Instead of being selective, let's talk about pervasive empowerment of the first lines, and then moving to the world of ethical data and a socially conscious AI. So that's where we have the opportunity ahead of us as I look at it. And I heard all of these topics over the last 2.5 days come together in the conversations and panels. Hopefully you'll all agree with that. So that's, in summary, how I look at our opportunity in front of us. So as I reflect back at the last 15 years and 15 plus years of metric stream, I stand here very, very excited because one of the things which is really coming to me is how do we think about the future ahead? After 15 plus years of founding metric stream, I still see GRC in its formative years. Metric stream is exceptionally well poised. I jokingly say that all the tourists have gone home. I'm not kidding it. All the tourists have gone home. Half a dozen companies last year have been consolidated. They have basically, left the space. They've been bought out by bigger companies because they were operating in very narrow swim lanes of GRC. Our promise to you is we're going to be around here 5 years from now, 10 years from now, because we are building a real thing. We're not looking for a consolation prize. We're looking for the ultimate realization of the vision of how we govern AI itself and how do we create AI for GRC and GRC for AI. That's the opportunity in front of us. As founder and chairman, I'm very proud of our vision, as you can tell. I'm very proud of Michael, who's come here a year and a half back, and how he shaped our thinking, and our leadership team, all what has been accomplished over the last year. I'm also proud of our employees who have tirelessly worked with the commitments that they've had over the years. But equally important, I'm very proud of each one of you, our customers. I call you guys our inspired leaders who are already shaping the organizations of the future and who personally inspire me every day for a singular purpose: to create a better world that performs with integrity. Thank you all.
Thank you very, very much, Steve, and for your service. It's a very humbling task to try to summarize what you have shared during the conference, but I will attempt it with a few quotes. I think when you started the conference and you all voted that you were here to learn as number one and network second, I think you've done that in spades. I think it's been fantastic to see how active you've been at the conference. I personally think that we couldn't have a better place than Baltimore to run a GRC Summit. I think it's humbling to think about Fort Henry right out here as the birthplace of the U.S. national anthem and the topic of the Star-Spangled Banner, and the fact that we all are stronger when we come together. And I think as GRC professionals, we are the modern era sailors, if you will, the modern ship that needs to defend. And specifically in the digital age, I believe very much that is the role of GRC for AI as we know it. So Jim Quigley started, anytime there was a failure in financial reporting in the past, the question asked was, where were the auditors? But today, shareholders are asking, where was the board? Where were the chief risk officer, the chief compliance officer, etc.? And Alicia brought that home when she said that an error today stays longer with you. It stays with you sometimes forever. And the risks we now need to manage and mitigate for are much higher in impact than what they ever were before. Kenneth Bacon, the member of the Comcast board, made it very clear and to the point, risk needs to be something that companies walk, talk, eat, and breathe every day, and he showed that in spades through the conference. And Tatiana shared that risk is an opportunity. We are not here to say no. We are here to say, let's look at the options. And I feel everyone in here has lived that through the conference. We just heard Gunjan talking about the 5 key pillars. And I genuinely believe, as where I started, that the passion is what moves us forward. And I'm impressed by the passion that every one of you have shown. But compassion is what makes sure we head in the right direction and that we do the right things. And I think he summarized that very, very well. René, in his energetic style, shared, we focus on risk management so that we can take more risks. Never forget that. Technology mitigates risks, but it's also introduce risk, and I think that's been highlighted very well throughout the conference. Sarah shared that almost everything we do has some element of third party in it, whether we know it or not. She opened our eyes for the unknown, the learnings we have to do. And Gaurav talked about the very fact that our whole go-to-market strategy is centered around your vision. We want to co-innovate with you, and we want to team up with every one of you. I think you've seen that through the partners that we have brought to stage. Andy brought a lot of partners to stage talking about how we can innovate faster, get to where you need to go when we work together with other vendors, other integrators and partners and advisors. He shared that today AI opportunities are abundant across the whole value chain. Gavin, from Verizon, he shared that you're as likely to be hurt by a single sword as 1,000 razor blades. Are you looking out for them? That image burned into the back of my head, because at GRC professionals, we for sure are going to make sure our organizations aren't going to be taken down by the sword, but how are we ensuring that it's not the cut of 1,000 razor blades? Tony, remarkable, strong message to all of us around the 3 big transformation drivers that we're going to have to pay attention to: digitization, security and privacy, machine learning, and AI. Oh, well, I do think it's important to perform. I do think that performance without integrity is like momentum without direction. And I do think that because I've learned from you what it takes to perform in a sustainable way, and that's my learning, my takeaway, and I thank you very much for that. I thank you for the privilege to be learning from you every day, and I thank you for the time you've spent here. I hope that I will see every one of you in London when we have the next GRC Summit, November 18 to 19. So thank you very much for your commitment, for your participation, and for, above all, for having been so open and sharing all the knowledge and information throughout the conference. You've been truly, truly amazing. Thank you, everyone.